What if I told you there's a place in America where the government paid every single resident to leave forever and never return? Not because of war, not because of natural disaster, but because the very ground beneath their feet had become so poisonous that staying meant death. Times Beach, Missouri exists today as a monument to environmental catastrophe, where in 2025, cleanup costs have reached $2.1 billion, a sum larger than the entire GDP of nations like Malta or Iceland. Families who thought they were buying the American dream found themselves paying with their health and homes. But this disaster didn't happen overnight. It began with what seemed like the deal of the century. The $2 billion promise that started everything. In 1925, the St. Louis Star-Times newspaper executives launched what they believed was marketing genius. Their offer was simple: buy a 6-month subscription for $67.50, about $1,100 today, and receive a free lot in a new development called Times Beach. Subscribers received a 20 by 100-foot lot carved from 480 acres of farmland along the Merrimack River, about 17 miles southwest of St. Louis. The newspaper marketed it as an escape from city life, and working-class families saw this as their chance to own a piece of the American dream. Most buyers needed 2 adjacent lots to build anything substantial, bringing their total investment to around $135, or about $2,200 in today's money. For families earning $20 to $30 per week in 1925, this required serious saving, but it was achievable in ways that land ownership simply wasn't in expensive St. Louis neighborhoods. The Star-Times made the deal even more attractive by offering payment plans. Buyers could put down just $10 and pay the remaining balance at $2.50 per month. Families like the Andersons bought 3 lots side by side, planning to build a summer cottage and maybe expand later. The Kowalski family purchased 4 lots, dreaming of a small farm where they could raise chickens and grow vegetables. These weren't wealthy speculators or developers. They were machinists, factory workers, shop clerks, and small business owners who saw Times Beach as their ticket to property ownership. The newspaper promoted Times Beach as a resort community where St. Louis professionals could escape summer heat and urban stress. Full-page advertisements featured illustrations of families fishing in crystal-clear waters, children playing safely in meadows, and fathers relaxing in rocking chairs on cottage porches. The marketing emphasized the Merrimack River as the community's crown jewel, perfect for swimming, boating, and fishing. What the advertisements didn't mention was that the Merrimack had a tendency to flood, sometimes dramatically. The land itself presented challenges that weren't immediately obvious to city buyers. Much of Times Beach sat in the Merrimack River floodplain, which meant it was essentially wetlands that dried out during normal weather but turned into temporary lakes during heavy rains. The soil was rich but soggy, requiring significant drainage work before construction could begin. Many lots were partially covered by seasonal creeks that looked charming in summer but became rushing torrents during spring floods. Early buyers discovered they were essentially pioneers, creating infrastructure as they went. There were no paved roads, no utilities, no municipal services of any kind. Families who wanted electricity had to pay for power lines to be extended from the nearest grid connection. Water came from individual wells that buyers dug themselves or hired local contractors to complete. Septic systems were crude affairs, often just basic drain fields that worked adequately during dry periods but failed completely when groundwater levels rose. Despite these challenges, Times Beach attracted steady buyers throughout the late 1920s. Families would drive out from St. Louis on weekends, camping on their lots while they slowly built small cabins or cottages. The Brennan family spent 3 summers constructing a 2-room cabin entirely by hand, with Mr. Brennan learning carpentry skills from neighbors who had arrived earlier. The Kohler family bought lumber on credit and worked evenings and weekends for 2 years to complete their cottage, which they proudly painted bright yellow so it could be seen from the river. Children who grew up visiting Times Beach during these early years remembered it as magical. They could swim in the Merrimack without supervision, explore dense woods without fear, and play with neighbor kids whose families had made similar investments in this riverside community. Parents relaxed in ways that weren't possible in crowded St. Louis neighborhoods, letting children roam freely and trusting that someone would always be watching out for them. The community's location along the Merrimack River created both its greatest appeal and its hidden vulnerabilities. The river provided recreation, beauty, and a sense of natural abundance that drew families back weekend after weekend. But the same geographical features that made Times Beach attractive also made it susceptible to environmental contamination that could spread quickly through soil and groundwater. The flat terrain and high water table that made the land affordable also made it perfect for retaining whatever chemicals might eventually be introduced. By 1930, Times Beach had evolved from a weekend retreat into something approaching a real community. Some families had built substantial homes and moved there permanently, commuting to St. Louis for work. Others maintained their city residences but spent entire summers at their Times Beach properties. Children attended a small school, families shopped at a general store, and residents had formed the basic social networks that characterized genuine neighborhoods. The newspaper's marketing success had created something the original promoters never intended: a permanent residential community built by people who had invested not just money but emotional energy in making Times Beach their home. These families had literally built their houses with their own hands, cleared their own land, and created friendships based on shared struggles and mutual assistance. They had transformed a speculative real estate venture into a place where people belonged, setting the stage for a community that would prove remarkably resilient in the face of challenges no one could have predicted. When the American dream survived the impossible. The stock market crash of 1929 changed everything, but not in the way anyone expected. While America's economy crumbled during the Great Depression, something unexpected happened in Times Beach. This community built on swampland didn't just survive the economic collapse, it actually grew stronger. When banks failed and factories closed across Missouri, families discovered that their weekend retreat along the Merrimack River offered something more valuable than any urban job, a place where they could live without paying rent. The transformation began in 1930 when the Kowalski family made a desperate decision. Mr. Kowalski had lost his job at the Anheuser-Busch brewery, and their St. Louis rent consumed what little savings they had left. Rather than face eviction, they loaded their belongings into a borrowed truck and moved permanently to their Times Beach cottage. The structure had never been designed for winter living, but the Kowalskis winterized it with tar paper, extra insulation, and a wood-burning stove they bought second-hand. Within 6 months, 3 other families had made similar moves, reflecting what Times Beach's later mayor would describe as the Depression's drive for lower living costs. These economic refugees transformed Times Beach through pure necessity. Summer cottages became year-round homes as families added rooms, installed better heating systems, and converted screened porches into enclosed living spaces. The Brennan family expanded their 2-room cabin into a 4-room house by building additions with lumber they purchased on credit from a sympathetic dealer in nearby Eureka. The Mueller family enclosed their porch and converted it into a bedroom for their 3 children, hanging blankets as room dividers for privacy. The community's response to shared hardship created bonds that prosperous neighborhoods rarely achieve. When the Andersons ran out of food in February 1932, neighbors appeared at their door with vegetables they had canned the previous summer and meat from rabbits they had trapped along the river. The Kohler family shared their milk cow with 4 other families, rotating daily milking duties and dividing the output based on who provided feed. Children attended school together in a converted garage, taught by Mrs. Patterson, a former St. Louis teacher who had moved to Times Beach when her husband lost his railroad job. Times Beach residents developed systems of mutual aid that would have impressed social workers. They established a community workshop where families could borrow tools, share knowledge about home repairs, and work together on larger projects like well digging or barn construction. The Svoboda family, who had operated a small grocery store in St. Louis, started a trading post in their front room where residents could exchange goods and services without using cash. Families traded everything from haircuts to vegetable seeds to carpentry work. The Dust Bowl catastrophe of the mid-1930s brought another wave of refugees to Times Beach. But these newcomers arrived with different skills and resources. Farming families from Kansas and Oklahoma had lost everything to drought and dust storms, but they understood agricultural techniques that existing residents desperately needed. The Hendricks family from Oklahoma taught Times Beach residents how to dig proper root cellars for food storage, while the Svoboda family from Kansas showed neighbors how to preserve meat without refrigeration. These agricultural immigrants transformed Times Beach from a collection of weekend cottages into a functioning rural community. They established vegetable gardens that supplied fresh produce for the entire town, created a small dairy operation with shared cows, and taught other residents how to raise chickens, rabbits, and pigs for meat. By 1935, Times Beach residents were largely self-sufficient in food production, trading surplus vegetables and meat to nearby communities for manufactured goods they couldn't produce themselves. Community celebrations became elaborate affairs that strengthened social bonds and provided entertainment during difficult times. The annual River Festival in July featured fishing contests, swimming races, and communal meals where every family contributed something to massive picnics that lasted all weekend. Children competed in three-legged races, adults organized horseshoe tournaments, and teenagers danced to music provided by local musicians playing fiddles, harmonicas, and guitars. The community's children enjoyed freedoms that urban kids couldn't imagine. They swam in the Merrimack River without adult supervision, explored miles of woodland trails, and played elaborate games that could last entire afternoons. Parents felt comfortable letting children roam freely because everyone knew everyone else's kids and took responsibility for their safety. Trust became Times Beach's defining characteristic. Residents left their doors unlocked, not just during the day but overnight. This deep trust extended to the environment itself. Residents drank water directly from the Merrimack River, used river water for cooking and bathing, and encouraged their children to play in the mud along the riverbanks. They grew vegetables in soil they had never tested and built homes without considering potential contamination from industrial sources. The community's population grew steadily from about 200 residents in 1930 to over 800 by 1950, then nearly 2,000 by the mid-1970s. Times Beach residents survived floods and economic recessions by helping each other rebuild and sharing resources. They maintained their sense of community identity even as surrounding areas became more developed. This resilience and trust would ultimately become Times Beach's greatest vulnerability. While residents built their paradise along the Merrimack River, industrial operations elsewhere in Missouri were creating problems that would eventually find their way to this unsuspecting community. The chemical factory nobody talks about. 60 miles northeast of Times Beach, a chemical facility was quietly manufacturing some of the deadliest substances ever created. The Northeastern Pharmaceutical and Chemical Company, known as NEPACO, operated from 1970 to 1972 under Hoffman and later Syntex in Verona, Missouri. While families along the Merrimack River built their American dream, this secretive plant was producing 2,4,5-T, a key component of Agent Orange used during the Vietnam War. From the outside, NEPACO looked like any other chemical plant of the era, with smokestacks, storage tanks, and railroad sidings for shipping products nationwide. Local residents knew it as a decent employer providing steady jobs for about 200 workers, but they had no idea what was actually being manufactured behind those chain-link fences. The facility operated under military contracts that required high security clearances, restricted building access, and production schedules that often ran around the clock to meet wartime deadlines. The production process generated highly toxic dioxin waste stored in large outdoor tanks. Current research reveals that NEPACO generated approximately 4,000 gallons of dioxin-contaminated sludge every month during peak production between 1969 and 1971. This waste contained dioxin concentrations measuring over 300 parts per million, levels now known to be lethal with minimal exposure. Current EPA safety standards consider soil contaminated at just 1 part per billion to be hazardous. Over NEPACO's operational lifetime, the facility produced an estimated 100,000 gallons of highly concentrated toxic waste that had to be disposed of somewhere. This wasn't ordinary industrial waste that could be diluted or neutralized through standard treatment. The dioxin-contaminated sludge maintained its toxicity indefinitely and became more dangerous when mixed with other substances because it could spread contamination to much larger volumes of material. Environmental regulations in the 1970s were practically non-existent compared to current standards. Companies like NEPACO could dispose of toxic waste using whatever methods seemed most cost-effective, with minimal oversight from state or federal agencies. Chemical manufacturers routinely dumped waste into rivers, buried it in unlined pits, or paid contractors to haul it away without asking questions about final disposal methods. The regulatory environment operated on the assumption that dilution would solve pollution problems. NEPACO initially tried several disposal methods for their toxic sludge. They buried some waste in unlined pits on their property, creating contamination hotspots that persist today despite decades of cleanup efforts. They discharged liquid waste into local waterways, contaminating miles of streams and groundwater. But as production increased and storage capacity reached its limits, NEPACO needed a more efficient disposal solution. The company began contracting with independent waste haulers who promised to remove the toxic sludge quickly and cheaply. These contractors didn't operate disposal facilities or treatment plants. Instead, they mixed the concentrated dioxin waste with used motor oil and other substances to create products they could sell to unsuspecting customers across Missouri. This approach solved NEPACO's disposal problem while generating additional revenue for the waste haulers, creating powerful financial incentives to continue the practice. Studies using advanced detection methods have discovered that dioxin contamination from NEPACO operations was far more extensive than anyone realized in the 1980s. Soil samples taken from areas around the original facility now show contamination plumes extending miles beyond the plant boundaries. Groundwater monitoring has detected dioxin traces in wells located more than 5 miles from the facility, indicating that contamination spread through underground water systems for decades before being discovered. The human cost of NEPACO's operations became apparent years later when workers and nearby residents began developing rare cancers, neurological disorders, and reproductive problems at rates far above normal populations. A health study tracking former NEPACO employees found that workers assigned to 2,4,5T production had mortality rates 40% higher than other chemical workers, with particularly elevated rates of liver cancer and immune system disorders. These health impacts occurred despite company assurances that workplace exposure levels were safe. NEPACO's waste disposal contracts created the crucial link between this industrial facility and Times Beach. The company needed to dispose of thousands of gallons of toxic sludge, while waste haulers needed cheap source material they could mix with other substances to create saleable products. The financial arrangement benefited everyone involved, except the communities where the contaminated products were eventually used. NEPACO ceased operations when Agent Orange production was banned in 1972, closing quietly without fanfare or media attention. The facility was eventually demolished, the land was sold to other industrial users, and most records of the company's activities disappeared into corporate archives. But the toxic legacy of NEPACO's operations was already spreading across Missouri, carried by waste haulers who had discovered they could transform industrial poison into commercial products. The connection between this chemical plant and Times Beach would soon become clear through one particular waste contractor who had developed what seemed like a brilliant solution to 2 expensive problems. The entrepreneur who spread death for profit. Russell Bliss was the waste hauler contracted by NEPACO who transformed this disposal problem into what appeared to be a profitable business opportunity. Between 1971 and 1976, He applied 160,000 gallons of his oil mixture in Times Beach alone, marketing his services as an affordable solution for dust control on the community's unpaved roads. Chemical companies needed cheap disposal for their toxic waste, while Missouri businesses and municipalities needed affordable dust control for their dirt roads and parking areas. Bliss positioned himself as the middleman who could handle both needs profitably, mixing industrial waste with used motor oil to create a product he sold as an effective dust suppressant. The economics were compelling for everyone involved. Napaco and other chemical manufacturers paid Bliss modest fees to haul away their toxic sludge, eliminating their disposal costs and liability concerns. Bliss then diluted this concentrated waste with used motor oil he collected from gas stations and repair shops, creating large volumes of liquid that he could spray on surfaces for dust control. His customers paid bargain prices for what they believed was recycled motor oil mixed with other harmless industrial byproducts. Bliss operated a fleet of tank trucks that serviced customers across Missouri, from small horse farms to major industrial facilities. His operation looked professional and legitimate, with uniformed drivers, proper commercial vehicle licenses, and insurance coverage that satisfied most clients' requirements. The scope of his operation was staggering when investigators finally mapped his customer base in the early 1980s. He had sprayed his toxic mixture on over 100 separate locations across Missouri between 1972 and 1976, covering thousands of acres with dioxin-contaminated material. Shenandoah Stables in Moscow Mills, Missouri, became the first location where Bliss's true product became obvious. Frank Hampel, who operated the stable, hired Bliss in May 1971 to spray the riding arena to control dust during horse training sessions. Bliss applied his mixture liberally across the arena surface, creating a dark, oily coating that initially seemed to work exactly as advertised. Within days, horses at Shenandoah Stables began showing severe symptoms that puzzled local veterinarians. By 1971, dozens of animals died as reported by CDC investigations, displaying symptoms that veterinarians had never encountered before. Animals developed skin lesions, lost weight rapidly, and exhibited neurological problems that affected their ability to walk normally. Children who played in and around the arena also became ill, developing skin rashes and respiratory problems that required medical treatment. Judy Pyatt, whose daughter rode horses at Shenandoah Stables, refused to accept explanations that blamed the horse deaths on coincidental disease outbreaks. She began investigating Bliss's operation personally, following his trucks to determine where he collected his waste materials and documenting his spray applications at various locations around Missouri. Pyatt's amateur detective work uncovered the connection between Bliss and Napaco, revealing that the dust suppressant contained industrial chemicals rather than harmless motor oil. Pyatt contacted the Centers for Disease Control and local health authorities, providing detailed records of Bliss's activities and the subsequent health problems at multiple locations where he had sprayed his mixture. Her persistence forced official investigations that eventually revealed the extent of dioxin contamination across Missouri, but this process took years while Bliss continued operating and spreading contamination to new locations. The tragic irony of Bliss's operation became clear when investigators discovered that he had sprayed his toxic mixture on his own property in Frontenac, Missouri, where his family lived and his children played. When questioned about this during legal proceedings, Bliss defended his actions by asking, "If I thought it was something bad, would I spray it on my own farm?" This statement would later be cited in Pyatt's lawsuit as evidence of his culpability, suggesting either complete ignorance about the toxicity of his product or reckless disregard for safety. Recent 2025 legal documents obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests have revealed new details about what Bliss knew and when he learned it. Internal company memos from Napaco discussed the toxicity of their waste products and specifically mentioned concerns about proper disposal methods. Bliss signed contracts acknowledging that he was handling industrial waste materials, and some documentation suggests he received basic safety information about the chemical composition of what he was transporting. The geographic scope of contamination from Bliss's operations extends far beyond Times Beach. Investigators have identified 27 separate locations where he applied his toxic mixture, creating a contamination network that stretches across eastern Missouri. Each contaminated site required separate cleanup efforts that have continued for decades. The Shenandoah Stables location alone cost over $30 million to remediate, involving the removal of contaminated soil, treatment of groundwater, and ongoing monitoring to ensure that dioxin levels remain below safety thresholds. Times Beach represented just one destination in Bliss's systematic distribution of toxic waste across Missouri. He sprayed his mixture on Times Beach roads multiple times between 1972 and 1976, applying the contaminated material to the community's unpaved streets and parking areas. Residents welcomed these applications because they reduced the dust problems that plagued the community during dry summer months, never suspecting that their solution was slowly poisoning their home. Bliss continued his waste disposal operations even after the horse deaths at Shenandoah Stables became public knowledge, and investigations had connected his activities to chemical contamination. He expanded his customer base and increased the volume of waste he processed annually, suggesting that financial considerations outweighed safety concerns in his business decisions. But while Bliss spread his toxic mixture across Missouri, the communities where he worked remained largely unaware of what was happening beneath their feet. Signs of contamination emerged gradually across Times Beach, manifesting as a collection of troubling symptoms that residents noticed but authorities consistently dismissed. The contamination didn't announce itself with dramatic explosions or obvious chemical spills. Instead, it revealed itself through subtle changes that created a pattern of willful blindness, ultimately costing thousands of people their homes and health.